The Book of Mormon takes place on this continent long ago.
On this continent? Do you mean during Columbus?
Even earlier. The Bible is a record of the people in the old world. And do you think that the Lord only loves his children in the old world?
So you mean the Indians? These drunk savages that we see running around here all the time?
I've heard of this. The truth is, your Josephsmith made this up, saying these people are written in your Mormon book.
There's no way that Joseph made this up. I mean, after all, you should see his grammar.
Of course he didn't make it up. He stole it.
I'm sorry. I don't want the missus to be angry. Good afternoon.
God bless.
Ben Winchester?
Yes.
When you peel back the pre-Columbian history of the United States, you might just find the Book of Mormon. Hidden in the Heartland. For over 100 years, most Mormons have looked for Book of Mormon evidence in Mesoamerica, the land between Mexico and South America. This has become a compelling argument, thanks to the beautiful ruins that make up ancient Central America, proof of a people who came long ago to this part of the world worshiping a great white god, with elements of an ancient religion littered throughout the remains of places like the Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, and Peru. Independent organizations within the church have invested much money and time in seeking for clues that might lead to finding anything that resembles the stories contained in one of the most controversial books of our time.
The church has never come out with an official statement of where the events of the Book of Mormon took place.
Filmmaker and archaeological enthusiast Robert Starling helps explain the Mesoamerican research.
One of the great criticisms that has been leveled against the Book of Mormon by critics of the church is that with the Bible, we know where the events of the Bible took place. And critics of the church have said, well, you know, you can't tell us where the city of Nephi was or where the city of Zarahemla was. And so I think for a lot of Latter-day Saints, if they were able to have some knowledge of where these things took place, it would, in a sense, strengthen their understanding and maybe their testimony of the Book of Mormon.
For some, finding evidence of the Book of Mormon would help settle a score of sorts for the decades of persecution of a people who simply sought to worship in peace. Many in the church have settled on the Mesoamerican concept, which is evident by such things as church films, paintings of Book of Mormon characters, as well as tours given to proposed historical Book of Mormon sites. Starling explains that this comes from words given by the one who knows the Book of Mormon better than any other, Josephsmith himself.
I don't know of a whole lot of research that's been done by church-sponsored institutions or BYU-sponsored organizations on the study of possible Book of Mormon locations in North America. And I think there's a reason for that. In the early days of the church, when the book, shortly after the Book of Mormon was first published, the first explorations that anybody had really known about in Mesoamerica was published by a couple of guys named Stevens and Catherwood. When the book came out about their travels in the Yucatan, a copy was given to Joseph Smith. And he read about these discoveries of great ancient civilizations. And in the Times and Seasons, which was the newspaper of the church, he made comments that this was evidence of the Book of Mormon. Now, I know that others have said, well, Joseph Smith didn't write that. Somebody else wrote that in the Times and Seasons. Well, Joseph Smith was the editor of the newspaper. He certainly had the opportunity to correct them if they were wrong. And so it just makes sense to me that he sort of pointed the direction to Mesoamerica in his own words.
While the text of the Book of Mormon gives some clues to locations, starting in Jerusalem, as well as a time frame, beginning with the reign of King Zedekiah in 600 BC, the rest is left to the imagination of the reader. Most other Book of Mormon geographical hints are self-contained. Names of cities and rivers that no longer exist, descriptions of things being east or west, north or south, as well as specific land masses, all are based on one's belief in the book itself.
When we look at the text of the Book of Mormon itself, it describes the three civilizations, the Jaredites, the Lamanites, the Nephites, and it talks about their cities and their culture and their wars and their kings and their activities and missionary journeys. Particularly in the 22nd chapter of Alma, a number of descriptions, the different cities and the relationship from one to another. The distances are all given in terms of how many days travel.
Only one piece of evidence remains constant on the American continent when it comes to Book of Mormon archaeology: the Hillcumorah. Located in Palmyra, New York, just east of the home of Joseph Smith, as well as the grove where Smith claimed to have had his first vision, the Hillcumorah is known as the place where Moroni is said to have deposited the gold plates 1,600 years ago.
I've been to the Hillcumorah in New York. It's obviously a very important location in Mormon history. That's where Joseph Smith was directed to the plates from which came the Book of Mormon. And I believe that with all my heart.
But the space between the Hillcumorah and the proposed Mesoamerican sites of the Book of Mormon is a distance of over 3,000 miles. And yet, so little time has been spent by LDS scholars in the areas surrounding the Hillcumorah. Does this show a discrepancy with the evidence of Mesoamerica, or is this not the Hillcumorah spoken of in the Book of Mormon?
As far as it being the same hill where the last great battles took place to end the Nephite civilization and the Jaredite civilization, personally I don't believe it's the same as the hill in New York where Moroni buried the plates. After the last battle that was recorded in the Book of Mormon, Moroni had, according to his own account in the text, over 30 years of traveling around and hiding from the Lamanites or whatever before he deposited the plates in the Hillcumorah, the New York Hillcumorah. The Book of Mormon Hillcumorah was a place of many waters, which doesn't fit the hill in New York. It was a place where the hill was high enough, Mormon was able to look out and see the bodies of hundreds of thousands of people who had fallen in battle. I've been to the hill that we call Cumorah in New York, and it doesn't give the opportunity for that kind of a vista. I personally feel that the hill that is described in the Book of Mormon is in Mesoamerica. Now, there's a very good candidate that has been discovered there. Scholars who have studied this believe that the hill Vigía near Veracruz in Mexico is the best candidate that seems to fit the description that's in the text. And there's a lot of correlations there that just make more sense to me.
Most LDS scholars and independent organizations within the Church have spent the last 100 years in Mesoamerica and almost no time in North America. The reason for this hinges upon a few key articles written in the Mormon newspaper known as the Times and Seasons.
One of the objectives of the Times and Seasons was to not just announce church information, but also news about the world in general. And the Lord had, in the Doctrine and Covenants, had told the saints to learn as much as they could about different countries and regions and so on. And so they often published news from other parts of the world.
Jonathan Neville, author of The Lost City of Zarahemla, makes the case that it was not Joseph Smith who originated the Mesoamerican concept of the Book of Mormon.
They published a series of articles that were excerpts primarily from books of other people who had been to Central America. John Lloyd Stevens was the most famous one. And then in September of 1842, there were a couple of articles published in the Times and Seasons that linked the Book of Mormon to Central America. Kind of the culminating article was on October 1st of 1842, and the headline was Zarahemla is in Guatemala. And that has had ramifications ever since.
It is assumed by LDS scholars that Joseph Smith made the claims, or approved the claims, of a direct location of a Book of Mormon city. Guatemala is Zarahemla. In his book, Neville proposes another possible influence that allowed the articles of such direct claims of exact city locations to be made. A little-known figure in church history named Benjamin Winchester.
He first shows up in church history in Zion's camp, and he was present when the first Quorum of the 12 were ordained and set apart, and during that process he received a blessing himself, which told him that he would be a great missionary. And he was a very zealous missionary. In fact, the very first issue of the Times and Seasons has a letter that he wrote to the editor about his mission in the eastern states. And so he was influential in the early Times and Seasons as far as writing material for them that they published. He ended up in Philadelphia, and he wrote several tracts and brochures defending the church, but he felt like more needed to be done. So he started his own newspaper, and it was called the Gospel Reflector.
Winchester went on to author many of the articles printed in the Times and Seasons. Having published his own newspaper, the Gospel Reflector, there were often similarities to the articles written in his newspaper to the Times and Seasons.
He wrote articles about a lot of different gospel topics, and it was in the March issues that he described the Book of Mormon. And he started off by giving his readers an overview of what the Book of Mormon was, and then he referenced several books about Central America as proving the authenticity of the Book of Mormon by the discovery that there were ancient civilizations in the Americas.
Winchester fought against anti-Mormonism constantly, including claims that Joseph Smith plagiarized ideas from a book written by Solomon Spaulding that took place in pre-Columbian North America. In fact, Winchester may have been influenced by another popular book of the day called Incidences of Travel in Central America, Chiapas, and Yucatan by John Lloyd Stevens.
John Lloyd Stevens, and Catherwood was his artist that went with him, they would perform public lectures and display their drawings and so forth in New York and Philadelphia, the major cities, and so it was in the news quite a bit. And so for Winchester, he had several reasons that he would want to link the Book of Mormon to Stevens' book, because for one thing, he had written a response to the Spaulding theory, which is an early thing in church history that people claim Joseph Smith had copied the Book of Mormon. And that was all based on him copying it from North American legends of the mound builders and so on. And so Winchester wanted to distance it from that. And he thought if he put it in Central America, he could avoid that anti-Mormon argument.
According to Neville, Winchester was the first to make the connection of the Stevens book to Book of Mormon geography. He was able to convince John Page, another missionary in the church, who in turn wrote to Joseph Smith.
John Page wrote this letter to Joseph Smith saying he'd come across a new course of argument for the Book of Mormon. Essentially paraphrasing him, he said, we can link it now to the discoveries of archaeology in Central America.
In February 1842, Joseph Smith became the editor for the Times and Seasons, while his brother William Smith was the editor for the other church publication called The Wasp.
Joseph Smith received a revelation in January of 1842 that the Quorum of the 12 should manage the newspapers, and Joseph Smith became the editor of the Times and Seasons in February. But in April of 1842, they started a new newspaper in Nauvoo called The Wasp, and this was founded and edited by Joseph's brother William Smith. And so since they were published at the same place, eventually over the summer they started coordinating editorial content. In fact, The Wasp published an issue in July 27th of 1842, and the next issue of the Times and Seasons copied what he had just published. So he was really producing content for both newspapers. The interesting thing about that is that William and Benjamin Winchester went back all the way to Zion's camp days.
It is Neville's assumption that while Joseph Smith was editor of the Times and Seasons during the months where Mesoamerican cities were linked to the Book of Mormon, he may not have been necessarily involved with the printing of these articles.
In most of September, Wolfwood Woodruff was gone. John Taylor was sick with a serious illness. We don't know for sure how long. So the only person available to publish the Times and Seasons was Joseph Smith himself. But at the same time, he was being threatened with arrest from the state of Illinois as well as the state of Missouri. He had people constantly trying to find him and so on. And he wrote letters that became Section 127 and 128 in the Doctrine and Covenants and sent them to the Times and Seasons to be published. He wasn't even there to publish his own letters. And so it's evident from the historical record that he was not editing the paper, certainly not on a daily basis or a regular basis, if at all.
For unknown reasons, Ben Winchester was ultimately excommunicated from the church. And after one issue of printing the articles on Mesoamerica, Joseph Smith resigned from the Times and Seasons. In Palmyra, New York, is the Visitor's Center for Joseph Smith's home, the Sacred Grove, and the Hillcumorah. Not far away is a hotel called the Palmyra Inn. Here, Wayne May, editor of Ancient American magazine, is giving a lecture about his findings of the ancient inhabitants of North America and possible connections with the Book of Mormon.
I am a one Cumorah guy. It all happened right here. I don't need 2 or 3 or 4 Cumorahs in Mesoamerica to make my Book of Mormon work for me. Native Americans are well aware of the final fight. They call this the hill where blood ran red all day.
There is no official declaration from the church that states that this hillcumorah is not the same spoken of in the Book of Mormon. In fact, unofficially, more statements are made confirming that this is the hillcumorah. Oliver Cowdery, one of the closest companions to the prophet Joseph, wrote numerous letters concerning the history of the church, one of which was very clear that he believed that this hill was the very hillcumorah spoken of in the Book of Mormon.
The fact that here, between these hills, the entire power and national strength of both the Jaredites and Nephites were destroyed.
One of the things in the Book of Mormon is that it talks about this particular hill called Hillcumorah. And it plays a pretty major role in the overall history because it is at this hill where not 1 but 2 civilizations essentially are eliminated. So establishing where this hillcumorah is really critical. We know in the Book of Mormon that they talked about that the hillcumorah was in the vicinity of their lands. Several times they go to the hillcumorah and they come back, and it's not years of travel, it's maybe a month or 2 of travel. And so that has led to those who have an idea of the Book of Mormon happening down in Central or Mesoamerica, they have had to essentially create a second hillcumorah down there. And then they say that the hillcumorah up here in New York is a symbolic hill, and that is where the plates were ultimately buried.
But a couple of questions still remain. Is this hill in upstate New York not the hillcumorah spoken of by Moroni in the Book of Mormon? If the few articles stating clear positioning of key Book of Mormon cities were true, why were they not published broadly? Why would they not have been included in the Doctrine and Covenants or other church publications? And with all the archaeological work done in the areas spoken of in the Times and Seasons, have these specific cities been found?
Somewhere along the line, the members of the church, or maybe the members who were, let's say, in the public eye of the church, they were looking so hard for archaeology to really substantiate. They didn't feel the earthen mounds of the East was enough, because the Book of Mormon talks about really mega populations, just hundreds of cities. They just got carried away with the romanticism of Central and South America. Massive cities, ruins all over the place, covered, both areas in large numbers. But the forests of North America, you couldn't see much unless you had a trained eye. But once you see it, and once it's pointed out, you'll see that North America is just as rich, just as plentiful as Central or South America in the ruins that are there.
We have been given all this information that Columbus discovered America, and all this stuff that isn't all true. We've not been told the rest of it.
The Indians, we have taken away their history. We referred to their history as prehistory.
The first explorers who came here destroyed it.
Hidden in the Heartland.